Hey Grace Church, Michael Campbell here, family pastor. Just wanted to go over this Sunday's lesson that the children will be going through and how the story applies to them, and as always, how it applies to us as primary disciple makers within the home. So last week we talked about David and Goliath. This week we're going to see how God made a covenant with David in 2 Samuel chapter 6 to chapter 7. So David, as we know, is a man after God's own heart. 1 Samuel chapter 13 says that. But though there were times when David showed the depth of his depravity, right? Like he also demonstrated a love for God that was radical. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, we see that this was taken form of David dancing with all of his might before the Lord, right? Like he was just exuding joy. And there was much external evidence of David's love for God, including his praising and rejoicing and dancing and playing instruments. And we also see in David's life a depth of love for God as evidenced in a way that he played. And so in 2 Samuel chapter 7, after David heard from the Lord through Nathan, we find the beginning of an incredibly humble prayer of thanksgiving to God. And David's first response to the great things that God has promised to him was to say, "Who am I, Lord God? And what is my house that you have brought me this far? Like, we are not deserving of this." David didn't stand up taller and display an attitude that suggested he deserved God's blessing. He did just the opposite of that. David recognized that he simply didn't deserve the good things that God had done and promised to do. And he had both sides. He was a person who loved God. He was a saint, but he was also simultaneously a sinner. And so when we think about God's work in our own lives, and when we read his word and recall the precious and very great promises, what is our response? Like, do we find ourselves believing that we deserve it, or wishing that there was more? Or do we rightfully understand that God alone has brought us this far, leading us to respond with praise and thanksgiving as it should be? And so as we are guiding the children this week, take some time to remember some of the great things that God has done in your life and how he saved you and others in your life. Remember how he has given you victory over sin. Remember the things that you've seen God do in the lives of friends and family members, and humbly thank God for what he's done and boldly ask him to continue that work. Not because we deserve it, but because we desire to see, to know, and to love God deeply. And so even when we mess up, just as King David did, intentionally messed up, God's grace is still greater than that sin. And so these are some of the things that we're going to talk about this weekend. And so check out the rest of the thread for some memory verse, discussion questions that you can go through with your children. But till next week, God bless and take care.